This episode of Skirmish Supremacy is brought to you by Reformation Brewery, the official beer of your game night.
And welcome back, folks, to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy Podcast. I'll be your host tonight, Nick. And Tim won't be joining us. He had family coming into town, and they just, how it worked out, they were showing up right before podcast time. So he is saddened by that, and told me last minute, he's like, Nick, you've got it. So now I get to butcher our guest names. There are two of them. So first off, we have James Wappel.
Hey guys.
He's joining us, and then we're also joined by Fred Barnard from Firelock Games.
Oh.
And we're going to be talking about we're actually going to be talking about something that I really don't think Tim wanted to miss out of a lot of topics. We're going to be talking about scenario writing. For those of you who don't know Fred, because he says he's the obscure person, even though his name's right at the top of the page for Firelock Games, he is the rules and scenario writers, or one of them over there. He's the lead for Firelock Games. So He has helped shape Blood and Plunder. For those of you who haven't played it, you're wrong. It is definitely a lot of fun, and the scenarios are excellent. And we'll dive into some of them in just a minute. And this actually came about because I was talking to Jim a couple weeks ago, and we were talking, different games and whatnot, and he started showing me some of the boards he's made, and that he's written scenarios for different games, and just a lot of custom stuff that he's done, and that actually matched right up to what I was right in the middle of. I had written a custom campaign for a games day for Blood and Plunder. And I was also asked to write some custom scenarios for a game of Dust 1947 that is coming up in January. So I was completely in the middle of it, and I'm like, that's something we haven't done here on the show yet. We've featured a lot of other aspects of the hobby and all that, but what about writing scenarios? Because in games, you can have a great set of rules, but if you don't have scenarios to run them in, you end up just kind of sitting there going, I guess we'll kill each other again, and just duke it out. But after a few rounds of that, it starts to get boring, and you're looking for something a little bit more, and that's where scenarios come in. So as I hog up all of the airtime, Fred, how did you get into writing scenarios?
Well, I guess first the sarcastic answer would be it was thrust upon me, but
At sword point with pirate hats.
No, because if you know anything about Firelock Games and Mike, the game's creator, that is not allowed. It would have to be perfectly historically accurate pirate hats and the right weaponry. and no simians. There you go. There's your reference, Nick. he'll love that one. Anyway, so how to start writing scenarios. I guess what we look at first is or what we looked at especially first with the original rule book was we wanted to do things that reflected history, because that's the whole point of our game. Is we try to do things that represent history, but it's fun and it's fast playing and it's light. It's not like your typical historical grind, we'll call it, right? So the first thing is people have a different conception about pirates, right? So we kind of like just hit the middle of the road. They're more like raid type scenarios and simple things that pirates did back in the 17th century. Nothing too fantastical. But then we had to balance them out and actually make them fun and interesting, right? So we very much reflected in our first set of scenarios, reflected, okay, what's close to what would be a historical type of scenario. So that's where we started.
Okay. And James, how did you go about starting into the wonderful world of writing scenarios?
I guess the first ones that I started to really write in earnest were for Lord of the Rings and our 40K games back in the day. And we did not like what was in the book. We did not want to do this whole roll a d6 and get a crappy scenario and roll the second one and get a worse scenario. And we said, you know what? We can make our own, and we can make these with a little more depth, because all the scenarios that we saw could be over by turn one, because one side just all it needed was a couple lucky rolls of the dice, or it depended on the terrain, or it was one of those kind of boring things where, well, whoever has two objectives to the other guy's one wins.
Right.
And we just said, there's got to be more than this. We have to be able to get a little more layers out of this. And we also wanted to make it to where by turn 4, it wasn't one of those things where the other guy cannot score enough points to win. And there's no point in even continuing the other 2 to potentially 3 turns. And that's when we kind of became obsessed with the scenario writing. How do you work around those? Either points balancing or terrain, or creating more conceivable ways to win for both sides. Because with scenarios, it's almost, what is it? There's 7 different plot lines in fiction, right? Or 3 or 5 or whatever it is. It's kind of the same thing with scenarios.
Right.
There's only so many things you can do, and I sort of feel sorry for, somebody who's in Firelock games and how has to come up with a dozen different scenarios that are kind of in the generic rule book, and he goes, well, if there's 7 plots, how do I get 12 stories out of 7 possible plot lines? So I just kind of look at you and go, better you than me.
Well, I have one thing going for me. Well, 2 things. I'm dumb and I'm stubborn. There's that. But actually, I kind of like that challenge because, we've all played miniature games for a while, or just games in general, and you know what those 7 storylines are. You just got to come up, and people expect those 7 storylines, but you can always give them a different spin on those 7 storylines. And I think we ended up doing it pretty well because Mike came up with the strike point system that we use. That's not necessarily an original thing, but it balances out our scenarios really well and gives them that twist. So that's exactly what you're saying. You're not eliminated from winning necessarily, and you still have a chance to stay in the game. There's still some tension, when playing a scenario.
Because it can happen too. I've seen people. The best example recently was a special scenario that was done. It was posted up on YouTube, and it had been talked about for weeks. And there was all this build up to it. It's going to be this huge event at a store with thousands of points on either side, and they had beautifully painted miniatures and fantastic, specially made terrain. And in about 22 minutes, you knew the game was not going to continue for much longer.
Yeah,
and it was a nightmare because they did not take into account the fact that one side needed not just a whole bunch more points, but they had to pray that the other side didn't roll anything above a 2 for a half an hour.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's terrible. And another, since you mentioned it real quick too, like another specter on that whole thing, especially in a store scenario, is downtime. You got to come up with big scenarios. You have to come up with a way for people to stay involved so they're not wandering around for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour waiting for their turn.
Right. And actually, I ran into that because I ran the first Blood and Plunder event I ran that was big. I had I have the cigar battle mats that lay out into a 12 by 6 foot table when all put together. So I had that all together, and we had, I forget, 8 or 9 players that first time around. Some never had played the game before. And so I had an idea in my head of, everyone, we would go in kind of a round robin, and certain ways of initiative going, but that it would, I would put out different objectives, and I had this loose idea in my head, and when it came to execution, it wasn't terrible, but there was something missing, and I was like, ugh. So this next go around I went, all right, I've got a storyline in my head, and all at the same time, or at the same time, Tim in the background is going, but hey, what about this guy? Hey, what about this guy? Hey, what about this guy? And it's the same pirate, John Morris. I was like, fine. It's the life and death of John Morris. I wrote 3 different episodes, and they were going to just be kind of dissimilar, just broken up. There's a raid, a sea battle, and a hunt in the jungle. It is how it was breaking down to.
Right.
And so, it was just supposed to be, hey, people can play the raid and, get a feel for kind of, ship to shore and how that interacts. And then the sea battle it's actually a chase. And then, when, we slapped a name on it, I started, I had a day or a day and a half when, I was like, all right, this is, and Tim kept going, well, John Morris would do this, or John Morris, damn it, I don't have time to become a historian and learn about what it wouldn't do. Let's just make this work and be interesting. Yeah. And luckily, it actually pulled off. I really like, what I wrote and developed there, and there's some tweaks from there that I definitely want to do, but it allowed people to have a chance to play the game, get to know some stuff. And one of the things is in that raid we had just an experienced person. It was Tim on one side, it was Nathan, one of our friends, on the other, who was playing John Morris, raiding this Spanish settlement. And then the defenders, all the new players had 2 units. They had a unit of milicianos and a unit of marineros or lanceros. And they were just trying to fend the pirates off. Right. And if their unit died or broke or ran away, they just started from one of a couple of different points on the board where they could start and come back into the game.
The meat grinder, the respawn.
Exactly, and so they were just trying to fend them off and whatnot, and it was a load of fun, and cool. Next time around it's just going to be a little bit of tweaking, and hopefully it'll be even more fun, because in both of the bigger games that we led, John Morris never really got off the dock.
Well, that's the problem. Is this where I talk about playtesting? Because that's like the most important thing, is having a good idea and then just playing it to death. That's like scenario writing, pretty much.
and that definitely is a thing, playtesting. And we had an episode just a little while back on the importance of playtesting, and right there is a good example. It looked good on paper, but there's a few things that need to be tweaked.
Yeah, and we're definitely living that right now, because we're coming out with our No Peace Beyond the Line expansion, and of course that means new scenarios. So it looks like we're going to have 5 new scenarios for the expansion in the same format as the original rulebook. So there's going to be a land, a sea, and amphibious version for each of them, right? So, so that's not fun coming up with all of those, but not impossible, just difficult. So then this time I took a completely different tack. Rather than getting them right the first time, I just spilled out what I wanted to do on paper. I knew they weren't going to work. I did not care, because I just wanted to get the raw ideas down, because if I look at it this way: if I tweak too much what I want to do because I'm afraid of what it won't do, then the other people that play it are never going to see my original idea. And then that being said, then I might surprise myself and it'll work if somebody with a different mind can look at it and be like, oh yeah, we can totally do this. We just got to move this over here, and this deployment zone sucks, but this one's better. And then you can actually, once you get more people looking at it, you can actually get them, like, you can probably get what you want.
Right. And that's definitely a good idea. Though I do know that being in the playtest group and getting some of the feedback on the playtesting has been a little bit challenging lately.
Yeah.
Holidays really screw things up.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I resorted to bribes.
Well, speaking of bribes, I've got another little side project that I'm ready to start having people, like test, play test and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I popped into one of the local groups here for a brewery, and I'm like, hey, it's the board game group. They meet up and whatnot, and I'm like, hey guys, who wants to meet up for beer and playing this game and beer and beer and give me feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely bribery is always a facet of this.
Yeah, it helps. I mean, people want incentive, that's for sure. I don't blame them, not at all.
Your incentive is you don't get mugged by monkeys if you get it right.
Yes. I'm glad to say there's not one in the Firelock office, if you're wondering. Big surprise there, right?
Well, that you know of.
There should be one on a dartboard. Mike's throwing darts at him.
Probably.
What are you doing, Mike? Oh, nothing. Just throwing darts at the monkey.
Animal abuse.
That's a paper monkey. It's not a real monkey. Anyway.
I think you and I, we were talking about the playtest group that I had for the baseball strategy game that I was doing. And I had 3 other guys and myself, and we drafted 16 teams, and we played out a season, and all of the really, really complex charts. I think it was about a half a dozen, actually more like a dozen of them, that all were 3D6 curve tables. We thought those were going to be the ones that we'd have to adjust and manipulate, and we didn't have to change a single thing. But the most obscure chart, the pickoff table chart, not only did we have to change it about a dozen times, went from 2D6 to 3D6, we had to come up with a separate game mechanic. And by the way, 2 of the play testers almost started beating the crap out of each other over that stupid chart.
Well, isn't that a sign of quality? I mean, I would take that as a feather in my cap. If that...
It was the most bizarre thing ever. The only other major change we had to make was for the relief pitchers warming up. That was about it. But this one guy, because he was the rules lawyer. Everybody had their function. Mm-hmm. Dave was the guy that didn't know anything about baseball, but they were all expert wargamers for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Hank was the guy that went to 50 baseball games a year and got to see all the other stuff they don't show you on screen. And he was also the guy that could calculate odds out to the 15th decimal point in his head.
Oh, that guy.
And could take any rule. And he said, well, there's no penalty for me to do this. The risk does not outweigh the reward, so I will continue to do this. And we came up with one idea after another, and he continued to do it. And then finally we had to do even another chart and then say, all right, fine. We will now say where the guy is standing by the base. If there's little markers on the base, you can throw there 1,000 times and he will never be out. And he said, oh, okay. And after all that, that's all it took to satisfy the rules lawyer. But you must have one of those.
Yes, you are absolutely correct.
Oh, yes.
What was the phrase we came up with? As soon as someone says, well, they're not playing it right, then you got problems with the rules.
No, it's true. That's very true.
Yeah, and it is a balancing act, and that person who's like, oh well, I can do this, can't I?
Yeah.
Yes, right now you can, but I am writing a note right now to ruin your day later because. Yes. And the worst part is when you figure out how they're screwing with you and how to fix it, and you show them how now you can't do it anymore. They're like, oh, okay, and you're like, I hate you so much right now. You're supposed to throw at least some sort of angry tantrum.
Nah, that's all part of the game. I smile. It's a back and forth. It's like I said, people enjoy breaking rules, and I enjoy patching up the holes. It's mutualistic.
It is. It definitely is. But especially in that, I don't know. I get wound up. Sometimes even though I know it's not personal, I take it there. That like personal like jab. It's like, ow! I feel that. I feel it.
Right.
And I know you don't mean anything by it. That's why I'm not going to say all the things that I'm thinking. And I'm just going to walk away and fix this.
Right.
And then when you don't react, I'm going to get mad because you didn't react.
Yes. Just
remind
yourself. They just want what's best for the game. Just remind yourself. Say that mantra over and over again. They just want what's best for the game.
I can see Fred, after particularly harsh day of critique, just rocking back and forth in a dark room. They just want what's good for the game. They just want what's good for the game.
Man, I wish. No, actually, it's funny. I'm like coldly professional. Nothing really gets under my skin. Now, listeners, this is not a reason to get under my skin. I would like to mention this. It is possible. This is not a challenge to the community. Thank you. But no, what I'm trying to say is I really don't take any of it personally, because I do honestly believe that. I mean, we have fantastic fans. I mentioned it once on our Facebook group, and everybody started making fun of me, but I mean it. So with all the dedication and love people are showing towards our little game so far, I mean, no, I really honestly think that people just want what's best for the game.
Definitely. I know for myself personally, and a few other people, that it's a really fun game to play. And one of the best parts about it is that each faction with its own feel and all that, no matter how the game starts going, it can change, and all of a sudden it better or worse, and so it stays fun. You may be getting beat up that first half of the game, and all of a sudden something just changes. That unit of yours that needs to get in close to make people scared gets in close finally, or whatever it is, and
Nick, I have two words that are immediately going to set you off. Ready? Light rain.
Light rain.
It sounds so innocent, does it?
Oh, it does.
And then all of a sudden, all your black powder weapons don't want to reload.
Yes, and that is the other, the fun part, is some of the different weather effects and how that can.
That's a good example of that twist that just turns the whole game around again.
It can. You're like, though I actually haven't suffered rain. Usually it keeps getting sunnier.
It really just gets hot. Oh, you haven't suffered rain? Oh man.
Not a lot. I think only one or two of our games have ever ended up really suffering rain.
That's when the Lanceros and the Indios become super terrifying.
I could see that. I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
But so for you have a particular challenge when you're writing your rules, in that you have to write it for 3 different situations.
Yeah.
You have your land, your amphibious, and your sea battles.
Correct.
So how do you balance that out?
Ooh, well, well, I mean, yeah, I had to think about this before when you asked me to come on here. I was like, okay, how do I explain how I do this? Well, essentially, it all starts with what we'd like to do, and that's simply the name of the scenario. Okay, so for example, one of the new scenarios coming out in the expansion is Raze. RAZE. So you're essentially destroying buildings. Okay, So, or destroying something. So there you go. You start there. So now we have to destroy something on land, sea, and somewhere in between. So sea is easy because on a sea scenario, all you've got is a ship. So now you get rewarded for setting another person's ship on fire. That's fun. That's fun, right? Okay, so then, all right, so then it automatically land kind of fills itself in because you get to burn down buildings. Now you just have to figure out exactly how you want units to deploy and what the rules are for that, et cetera, et cetera. And then it seemed to me anyway, amphibious is always the kind of the tricky one most of the time because the whole thing is design. Our amphibious scenarios are designed for pickup games where one player shows up with a ship and one player doesn't. So then you have to add a twist onto it. So it's not exactly the same as your land necessarily, but it's got to have like a little different color. It's got to have a different feel than the land scenario, and somehow balance it out because you're going to have one guy with a ship presumably loaded to the nines with guns, and then another force on land. Though I personally try to write them to force people out of that too. So I mean, sometimes you're going to play some amphibious scenarios, for example, but you know what? I don't really want them to show up. I want them to show up as like more of a landing party. So let's make more something that like benefits a landing party instead of a gunship. So for example, in that raise example, what we've done for the amphibious version, is we've made it so the defender gets free gun emplacements with the option of upgrading to a heavy cannon. I mean, come on, that can't suck, right? But the attacker only gets a benefit if they rush in there and they destroy the guns in the emplacement. Aha. So what's more effective? Sitting back and pounding with artillery? Not really. It's actually conceivably a bit easier if you split your force maybe, and then run in and actually spike the cannons. So there you go. So yeah, that's the thing. It all really starts with the name. It all starts with raise or of course or the dreaded escort mission, which we finally haven't shied away from. We're doing it this time. We're doing an escort mission. It all starts with that one scenario, and then you have to usually land and sea. In my experience, are pretty easy, and then amphibious is the one that you really got to scratch your head over.
Interesting. Well, just because I've always put land and amphibious for Blood and Plunder just together. It's just that whereas you might have needed to run off this board edge in land, you just have to get back to your ship in amphibious. Boom,
right,
done. And actually for that first scenario the custom scenario that I wrote, that was actually what I did, is that, hey, you play this land, this is what you do land style. You play it amphibious, there's these couple of ways you can play it amphibious, and, no way for you to play this on the sea. Technically, you probably could, but, especially designing this as more of a, at least an introductory scenario for somebody, or for, even multiple new people, much easier to just go, I'll handle the sea another time.
Right.
So it's interesting that, for you, the amphibious is kind of like how do I do this? Though the sitting off the coast and just, shooting your guns at them could definitely put a damper on that whole amphibious thing.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what we actually write them to give them incentive to actually get in there and mix it up in hand-to-hand too. Like some of our original amphibious scenarios is like you get a strike point if you're not on land by turn 3 or later. It's like, look, you have to actually storm. You can't sit back and shoot. It's to push you, to keep you moving towards land.
Right. And that's understandable. And actually, in that first scenario, the first scenario is there's 6 to 10 buildings on the shore, and you're trying to plunder them. You're trying to, loot them and fight off the guards before, or, fight off whoever's there before, the rest of the militia comes out. And there is a fort there. It's not manned, but they're running to man it. So you want to get on your ship and get out of there before they do that.
Yeah, correct.
And so there's all the incentive, because for you to win, you have to go collect treasure.
Right.
And then, there's, X amount of treasure tokens, and you have to get up to the buildings, roll to see if the treasure's even in those buildings, and then move on to the next one if it's not. So,
right.
All of your incentive is, like you said, get off the ship, get onto shore, and then, move from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
that's actually, just something just popped into my head, and that's a good example of, at least with how we're writing scenarios for the game at this point, as compared to what the fans are writing. And this is, Mike, I don't think Mike's going to disagree with this. This is kind of, I'm happy this is the way this is happening. We're writing scenarios from the company standpoint in a pickup or a tournament, simple fashion, clear, clear victory conditions, balanced. Also, the way I like to think of it, it's kind of the gateway into people to be like, oh, okay, that's how you do this, so they can write a big narrative like you're doing. Because there's no way that we're going to hit every narrative and give everybody what they want out of a pirate game. And, from the get-go, it's yes, please make the pirates or make the scenario that you want, but here are kind of the tools so you guys can figure out how to do it if you're not exactly sure how. So that's really, that's cool that you're saying that, because that's something that I think about all the time.
Neat. So, and I was looking at another game system, and I noticed a lot of their scenarios were point imbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
And you just mentioned something that made me think about it, in that, hey, the defenders get cannon that they can upgrade to heavy cannon, but they get so many cannons for free.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that to make sure that it isn't point imbalance? If they get say 6 light cannon or 6 medium cannon for free, that's 20, 30, 40, I forget how many points exactly, but it can be a bunch of points.
Yeah, it can be.
And that can, in a 100-point game or 200-point game, probably 200-point game if you got a ship and all that, that can make up a difference. That can be a quarter to or more of points.
Yeah, it can be. Well, of course, you do your best estimate. In that scenario, for the free gun emplacements, you get 1 for every 50 points of the point total you're playing. So
okay,
there's the limiting factor there. So usually we like to do things that way. Is you get this much free stuff for this many points that you've invested in your force, and then it's simply just the fact you just go with your instincts, at least when you're first doing them, and you just play test them and tweak them until you make sure that they're right. And that's the thing. I'm Mike and I collectively, I think, have pretty good instincts about coming up with this stuff in balance. Oh, and sometimes we completely screw up. Don't get me wrong. Luckily, you guys don't see that. But wow, that was a terrible idea. Wow, what were we thinking? All right, let's change that.
oh yeah.
But that's the thing, is you kind of in a way got to be brave enough to be well, that might seem a bit silly, but let's give it a shot. Maybe we can tweak it. And at this point, doing the design stuff with Mike, I honestly I don't feel like we've come against anything. I don't panic about fixing things anymore. It's just be oh, we'll figure this out, which is a nice place to be, So I think you just got to throw it out there and just be brave enough to be all right, this might be complete crap, but if I pull this off, this is going to be the most awesome thing ever,
Right. And I guess one of the other things to look at is when to acknowledge something is dead, that it's just not going to work, or something along those lines. And I think that one is definitely challenging. I don't know. Have you when either when you've gone, ooh, this is crap, or it's not quite working, but you keep trying to tweak it and it just keeps not quite working. Have either of you run into that one?
Yeah, sometimes I know. Well, I use the baseball game as an example. The relief pitchers, you cannot just consistently have them get up and warm up from inning number 1 to inning number 9, because that would A, be unrealistic, and B, that would be an overpowered type of thing. And in our game, we were trying to make fatigue cumulative. It would affect the next game, the next series. So how do you keep track of these things without bogging people down with 20 years of paperwork and accounting? And of course, this is before apps. Now everybody's saying, well, Jim, you could do all that just as apps, and you could play the whole game. You wouldn't need dice or a board or anything. I said, well, don't know how to write apps. And I was kind of hoping to have a board game with miniatures, because it'd be something good. You could paint the figures and your team colors, and kind of the same reason why people have an army or a Blood Bowl team or anything.
Yeah.
Or what's the other Guild Ball now? And you could turn that into an app too, but there would be no miniatures and nothing to paint.
Right.
And that was the thing, was how do you keep track of all these clerical things? And also these guys accumulated experience, and injuries were accumulated. How do you keep track of all that without bogging the people down? So we actually came up with an intermediate and advanced. And I don't see a lot of, I guess too, some of the, like in the historical games, if you're going to do a historical scenario, they kind of consider that advanced. They'll say, look, start out with the basic ones out of the book, and then move on to historically accurate scenarios. I don't know, did you guys do that for Firelock? Kind of say, okay, here's kind of for folks that are getting used to the rules, and if you're down pat here, now you can dive into this rule set.
Yeah, we actually set the rule book up that way. It's set up, do land first, because land is 3/4 of the rules, and it's the simplest. And then, okay, here's artillery and the next thing. Now do this, put a cannon on the board. And then here's ships. And now, hey, look, you know all the rules. So the rule book itself was progressive in that way.
And they actually have a line in the book, a literal line, and right above it in bullet print, it's like, here's where you should just stop reading and go play a game.
Yep.
And it's awesome. And I've shown people more than once when they're like, oh, how does this game work and all that? I'm like, there's all this, and they start going, eyes getting really big, and I'm like, but wait, and I'll flip to that spot and be like, but right here, this is all you need to get to before you start playing.
Yeah.
And once you start playing, all those ideas that you read about and all that, all those concepts come together, and the rest of it, for the most part, makes sense.
Yeah.
I would say that, for me personally, playing Blood and Plunder has been one of the few games where, as I'm playing, everything that I or pretty close to, I'm pretty sure this is how this works. It's usually pretty close to that.
Yeah. Well, thanks you, because we tried really hard to make it as intuitive as possible. It's like, okay, I think this is the way it works. We wrote rules just for that. It's like, okay, these people, even if, we don't want you like burning your brain trying to look up a chart or figure out a rule. It's probably what you think it is.
and that has made it even simpler and just easy to show other people.
That's cool. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Fantastic. Thank you. That's a very high compliment.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely know when Tim and I, and most of the listeners have heard this enough times that they can probably quote it. But, Tim and I, we talked to you a whole bunch the weekend of Adepticon and all that. And then, we got on the plane and we had the rule book, and, we were flying back, and, even in our, sleep deprived haze, where we were looking at the rule book going, man, I really like this, and stuff like that. So,
cool.
even the scenarios have been been good, and they are a good platform for jumping off. The consideration of well, how do they do land and amphibious? Reference that for what I'm trying to do here. How can I incorporate those things so that other people can have fun with it?
Cool, excellent. Thank you. Like I said before, that makes me very happy to hear that. And to answer your first question about when you realize something is dead, and I got to agree. Like when things become too complex, is usually the death knell for whatever rule. we're working on. One good example in the expansion, which Mike is going to hear this and he's going to like grin from ear to ear, is there was rules, and they're not necessarily dead. They might come back one day, but at least I didn't want to tackle the possibility of having units that could swim. That, like, I always tell Mike, he's probably sick of hearing it, like, that rule's a rat's nest. I just say it over and over again. And if anything we determined to be a rat's nest that's way too complicated, is usually something that we'll give up on. So, yeah, so because, once again, because that is like the mantra that we recite over and over again for our game, is things have to be simple. You know, we can add some depth, we can add some complexity, but we have to make the rules for it as simple as and intuitive as we can.
So are people going to be able to swim or not? Wait a minute now.
No. We originally had a native faction that had units that could swim. And to be fair, I probably overreacted a little bit, but I was like, what are you doing? Like, how many other rules do we have to write? What can you do while you're swimming? Can you shoot weapons? Can you initiate melee combats? What can you do while swimming? How do we explain that nobody else can swim? Are these Indians the only people in the entire 17th century that could swim? You know? So, like I was saying, like I said before, it's not a dead thing, and I do have complete faith that we could somehow fit things into the rules in the future if we needed to, but due to the complexity of that and how, in my opinion anyway, it wasn't necessary to the fun, balanced gameplay of the game, we just, we gave it up. We abandoned it.
I didn't catch that one. I'm now feeling a little crushed.
Oh, the swimming thing? Oh yeah. Well, once again, there's a reason you didn't catch it, because we gave up on that one. I did flip out, I have to admit. but
because they could shoot bows from the water.
Do you want to play a game of Blood and Plunder with the synchronized Indian swim team? I would rather not, honestly.
That sounded more and more like the pick-off table right there.
Yeah, there you go.
For the fluff and the fact that it was going to be like a very, very selective group, mm-hmm. I do feel a little sad to hear that that's not going to make it right now. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, for the fact that when it does present something that is such a radical change, I can totally understand and appreciate that. You've got to go, all right, well, this can't happen right now for X, Y reasons. Right.
And then you have to be careful, in my opinion, about what. Sure, add some complexity to the game, but just make sure it counts. Is swimming really necessary, for example? In my opinion, no. So why would you add to the game if it's going to add a bunch of rules for something that's the game functions fine right now without?
Because ambushing those damn Dutch is highly important as they sail around in their little flutes, and steal all my stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was once again, Mike comes up with these things. Mike is the historian. I'm just a game mechanic, right? And I'm like, so I looked at the lists when he was giving them to me, and I'm like, Dutch are boring. There's no color, there's no flavor to the Dutch at all. And then I played them, like, oh my god, these guys are beasts. They're punching me in the face over and over again. Stop it.
And he said no, because you said that they're boring.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm gonna punch you again now.
Yes, with my Dutch.
I can only imagine what it's like trying to make factions have real differences between each other without the dreaded something goes haywire, where they have the sphincter cannon that destroys everything on the board on a 1 or better on the first turn, where something's too fast, too slow, I know I've seen some games go to basically a D10 system so that they can have 10 levels of stats instead of just at a 6-sider, you really have 4 stats that matter. Because you go too far to either extreme, it's just too much.
Right. Yeah, with the different factions, well, once again, history helps us out with that. So we have a bunch of historical references about what these factions actually did. So that's a help. So that gives you a nice, once again, I'm speaking for Mike on this one because this is all him, but I'll make it up. But there is I know he does look pretty heavily at what these guys did historically to decide what they can do in the game.
Right.
Right. And really, I mean, obviously some have some pretty cool abilities, but the faction stuff is more, in my opinion, done to capture the flavor of the faction, not to give them some really slick power move. And like I said, I think he's got really good instincts with that. So far so good. We'll see what No Peace Beyond the Line holds, but like I said, he came out with a gazillion new factions, and they all seem, I mean, pretty good to me, at least so far in playtesting. But yeah, I don't imagine that's easy to do. I'm not jealous of him at all for that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge because because everything does have its little nuances that make each one fun and compelling for why you would choose to play them over any of the other ones.
Right.
So
yeah. And yeah, I mean, and it was posed to us recently too that what happens in a tournament setting if the cream rises to the top, as it were. And some of that's going to happen a little bit, but I really don't think so. I think there's just so much diversity and so many choices. I think that, there might be some favorites, but I really think that they're all different but similar enough that things are going to balance out when we have the full list of them out there. So.
Yeah, and I think the addition of a lot of the other generic things will also help with that.
Yeah.
Some of the generic units that can be brought across.
Oh, the Europeans, actually.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, you can play whole factions of the generic units too. So that's our Swedes and our Danes and the Brandenburg Prussians, whoever they are. I said you're not talking to the historian. I'm getting into it, but I'm way far behind the curve. That's for sure.
Yeah. But really one of the best examples would be the Lanceros versus the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
That's two very different units.
Oh yeah.
You have these guys that are carrying these half pikes that will be really really stabby. Yeah. And then you have these other guys that will shoot you before you can even get close.
Right.
Yet somehow those Lanceros can always manage to get close enough to stab you.
Yes. Well, because the Lanceros are absolutely terrifying. That's why.
Right? But I swear, they get seriously lucky every time. There's just something that you guys have programmed into the dice. If Lanceros get shot at and they haven't had a chance to charge, they don't get hit.
Yeah, that's true. Or they die just as gloriously as they. I don't know. I once again, I'm the dice hate me too. So if I can manage to get him in there, I'm like, yes, I've wiped out a unit, and then the fire from the neighbors wipes them out completely. Well, they took one unit out. They earned their points. But.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. To see how everything's developed, and like I was saying earlier, and kind of on what Jim was just saying on how to balance a game where you don't have that just overwhelming force to begin with, and some of that just comes down to that really bright sun or that just kind of anything. In one scenario, we had an event card the first round, which ended up making everyone, like, one unit had 3 fatigue on it or something like that. Everyone had like a reload marker.
Yeah.
I forget what it is, but it it jacked like everyone's plans up.
Yep.
Except for all the close combat guys. They were like, "Woohoo, let's go,
Yeah,
guys!
exactly.
We're not getting shot this round."
Yep. Yeah.
So, there's enough, and that's the other part to it, is that, the event system helps to break things up so that you
Right.
don't have that overwhelming, just getting shot off the board.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned it too before too. The other two big players in that, actually the bigger players in my opinion, they're like fatigue and reloads. Especially fatigue, in my opinion. The Blood and Plunder is essentially a fatigue management game at its core. Because that's fatigue. Fatigue is bad to have even in small amounts. It's really bad if you're playing against the Spanish.
Oh yeah.
So I love the Spanish. I think they're my favorite army, actually. But yeah, that's the thing. Is like, and like to your point, like, yeah, it's the managing the reloads and the fatigue along with the events is a great way to flip things back and forth to like create that imbalance, unexpected imbalance, to like turn the game back and forth a couple times. And I'm really pleased that it turned out as good as it did.
Definitely. All right. Oh, time hack. We got a few more minutes, actually. I thought we're pretty close, but guess we'll go into some closing statements, even though we got a little bit more into, just rule writing than scenarios, which is all good. I've been doing all of it lately. I know Tim's been doing even more of it lately himself, but I've got my own little things that I've been working on, and scenarios being a big part of it. Trying to finish some of those up as well. And it's just it's been interesting, and I was sitting there going, I wonder how other people go about doing this, especially right after I ran my last Blood and Plunder day, where I introduced that campaign and I sent the first scenario over to Mike, and Mike was reading it. You put out your new sets of scenarios, and one or two of them have a lot of parallels to what I've written. Mm-hmm. And so I was just kind of chuckling. I was like, oh geez. I wrote these, and then Fred came out with those. That's like Ray's is similar to that first scenario. And that, I think that's like the first one in the new scenario playtest that you put out.
Right.
And I was just like, oh wow, there's a scenario very similar, and whatnot. So, any closing remarks, gentlemen?
Go ahead, Jim. You can go first.
I would say make sure you have multiple levels of ways to get victory points, at least some kind of 3, where you have the one sort of big home run objective, a bunch of little ones, and then some really small ones, so that one player cannot completely shut the other one down. Because if it gets into a thing where all I need to do is do this and the other guy can't win, that's where it's going to either be a 2-turn game, or after turn 4, someone's throwing a knife at you. It's just, you can avoid that and continue to play, actually, if you just try and give people layers of ways to win where one guy cannot completely stop all of them.
I agree. And actually, with the Dust 1945 scenario that I've been writing, that's actually, so in it you're basically racing each other for, one person has the goods, and then everyone else is trying to get the goods from him, but some of them will have orders. If you think that before the end of the game you won't be able to get it, just make sure he doesn't leave with it. But primary mission, try and get it. try and get the stuff from this person. But and with that, it's also it's going to have a bunch of trucks that are leaving the map. So it's not just one thing that you might just nuke just because. And so there is there's those layers to it, so that it you don't even know if that other player has that.
Yes, and kind of avoid objectives that you can destroy, because I've seen other battle reports go awry because someone says, well, I'm going to lose anyway, boom, and they just blow up the objective. So that is so many times it seems like a good idea, and we would put things in where if this player destroys it, he loses, and if the other player destroys it himself. So there was no way they could purposely destroy the objective to just kind of avoid defeat.
Yep.
It was make it where if either one of them destroyed the objective, they were both hosed, because then they had to close in and get it instead of just shooting at it to blow it up. It's like, nope, we have got to close. We actually have to engage. Can't just hide in the corner the whole game, or that objective rush, where somebody's hiding with their fast units, and on the last turn they just run forward to contest the one objective they need to win. So if you can avoid those situations, it takes a little more thought. But boy, you're gonna have more enjoyable games and probably want to play more, because eventually those kind of games they just move on to the next game then.
Right. All right, Fred.
Well, I agree with everything that Jim said. You definitely have to write things. I don't know. Open-ended is not the best term, but you definitely have to write things. So yes, there's a primary objective, and you have to close it up so it can't be exploited. But then again, you have to leave it open enough so you don't only leave one route for scenario victory. And I think the way we do strike points in our game lends itself very well to that, because simply you have the objective, the other guy gains a strike point, and if you don't have the objective, you gain a strike point. and we even did this exactly like Jim said in our expansion. If you blow up the objective, or you kill the dignitary, or you whatever, then guess what? Everybody loses. So it seems like it's working out pretty well. And yeah, that is sometimes a difficult balance to find. I don't know, but I go a little bit differently, just in the fact that I say, you know what? Give it a try. Do what you're not supposed to. Blow up some buildings. It's I don't know. I'm you might surprise yourself if you can write things cleverly and figure out a way to close up the loopholes. You might be able to make some gonzo scenario actually work. You are, and not in a bad way, you're kind of hemmed in by your subject matter. For example, in our game, people, history is a limiting factor, not in a bad way, and people have a certain set of expectations about what pirates are, whether they're fantasy or historical, So, like you said, Nick, you put out your scenarios, and they were very similar to what I came up with. Well, that wasn't for no reason. Like I said, the people have a certain set of expectations about what pirates are, and that's kind of nice. But you just got to find that twist to put on it and see if you can do that kind of weird thing that people aren't expecting, just to mix it up a little bit. Because, like Jim said earlier, there really only are 7 stories and scenarios that you can tell, just like anything else. It's just, I don't know, just hopefully coming up with that little twist or that little trick that makes it, different. Oh, wow, I haven't seen this before.
Definitely. And, that is, because, what is the first scenario in every game you play?
Kill the guy.
Kill the other person.
Yep.
And so, making it where, it is different, it is unique, is definitely challenging. I guess in a baseball game, it's not kill the other guy, but,
It could be.
It could be, but I don't know if you'd call it baseball.
No.
And it
sounds like an expansion, actually.
Sounds like a GW riff on the game at that point.
Yeah, it does.
Well, at least in the baseball game, you can't intentionally walk everybody. Eventually, the other guy's whatever his big thing, that's you're gonna have to face that for real at some point.
Oh, there you
go. Interesting. But all right. So yeah, I mean, fun discussion, especially on kind of baselining how scenarios kind of are baseline, at least for some people, and how they can be the templates for other people, the hobbyists and such, to expand upon, to enhance the gameplay, because there is only so much you can do when you have certain restrictions, like making sure it is accessible to everybody, or making it generic enough for casual gameplay and or tournament play. If those are things that you're looking at doing, and it's those are definitely important things to have. Well, the casual play is definitely tournament play, not so well. I don't find it as important because tournaments usually bother me. Brings the wrong people around.
I didn't like tournaments either. I know we're getting close on time here, but the one thing I mentioned to appeal more to the casual gamer and to actually add a bit more depth is all the narrative scenario special rules that we came up with that simply plug into like a generic scenario that you've already got. So, for example, you want to burn down buildings in a raised scenario on land. Okay, now how would it change if you did it at night or in a heavy fog?
Ooh.
Or if you caused a distraction at the beginning of the battle? All these little things that just add a rule or two, which will completely change the way the scenario plays.
Very true.
Yep.
Or light rain.
Yeah, to anybody out there listening who's encountered light rain and Blood and Plunder, I wrote that. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not too sorry, but I'm kind of sorry.
He's going to be sorry now that he's admitted to it.
I've already put a bullseye on myself anyway, so what's to lose now, really?
Not a whole lot. You've endorsed Blunder Monkey. Mike's going to hear this. So Blunder Monkey, Fred has endorsed it.
No, that never happened. I never endorsed the Blunder Monkey. I would never. I'd be tossed into the bay off the coast of Miami, never to be seen again.
Team Orlando, Blunder Monkey for life.
Come on.
That's what he was shouting before the show, Mike. Don't believe him.
Sure.
Well, gentlemen, I want to say thank you for coming on. It has been awesome to have a chance to talk with both of you again. I know, Fred, it's been almost a year since we met and did a brief interview at Adepticon. So
yes.
Definitely was fun. Will you be one of the ones attending Siege of Augusta?
I will not. That will be Team Miami, we'll call it. The next time that Mike's going to let me out of the janitor's closet where I'm locked is going to be probably for Adepticon again.
Well, you've got rules to finish up.
I do.
He's just got to go be the face of the game.
Yes, I'm sorry. Love you, Mike. Sorry. You knew this was going to happen, Mike.
So yeah, I'll be going to Siege. Tim's going along as well, and then we will be at Adepticon following that. So I guess we will see you there at Adepticon.
You will.
And James, thank you for coming on. It's been good having a chance to catch up with you again.
Well, thank you very much. And I guess we'll all see each other at Adepticon.
Yes, we'll all see each other at Adepticon. So,
huzzah!
Oh, and I totally forgot to say this at the beginning of the episode. Hey, welcome to the new year, because this is going to go out Monday morning, which is the beginning of the new year.
Oh, hey, Happy New Year! Woo!
Oh, Happy New Year. We can set up some fireworks.
Now?
In my neighborhood, there will be fireworks. 4th of July starts in May and ends around October.
Okay.
All right, folks. You have a great time and have fun gaming. I don't know. Tim usually ends this. I don't know what to say. That sounds great.
That was smooth, real smooth.
It's real smooth. All right, I'll go with that then. Have fun gaming.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.